Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Bob Hieronymus, and our executive producer and research assistant for now is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington. They are the Fifth Dimension and the Birds, one of my favorite groups. If you want to find UFOs, then you will need Nick Redfern's book, Area 51. Which reveals the truth of UFOs, secret aircraft, cover-ups, and conspiracies. Have you been out there to Area 51?
Well, I haven't been, right up to the area where, people basically put themselves in jeopardy if you go too far. So, but I haven't gone that far, no, because, the inevitable outcome is that people just get arrested and fined, jailed or whatever, and it's pointless because you're not going to see anything. Because what a lot of people don't realise or understand is that even if you go to sort of you get out there and you start walking or driving and you see the signs warning you not to go any further, and there's like the little buildings, where the security guards are, a lot of people don't realise you're still about 15 to 16, 17 miles away from the base itself, which is surrounded by mountains and hills. So, in other words, actually sort of going to the base or trying to get to the base, which is almost impossible, you're not going to achieve anything at all. So what I've done with my research is to sort of dig into the historical data, use the Freedom of Information Act, and interview people who used to work there and put together sort of like a cohesive story based on what we can actually learn from all this, rather than just getting arrested because you want to have a face-off with one of the security guards, which is only going to end up, in a pointless scenario.
Sure would be. It sure would be. So, but as you approach it, though, it's very desert-like. Is that right?
Well, yes, and I mean, this is one of the important things to note about Area 51 is its location. It's in the heart of. It's actually less than about a 70, 80, 90-mile drive from downtown Las Vegas. It's actually not, in the middle of nowhere. But as I said, the big problem is you cannot get within about 15, 16 miles of the base. There are sensor equipment all over the place, infrared cameras at night, helicopters constantly flying around, security personnel. And as I said, the most important thing is that you just, it's pretty much difficult or impossible to sort of beat, these sort of huge hills and particularly, in the height of the summer when in Nevada, it's almost torturous to try and walk sort of 100 feet, never mind 15 miles. But the reason why Area 51 exists where it does, actually have to go back to Pearl Harbor in December 1941 with the surprise attack of the Japanese, and unfortunately killed thousands of people. But the story itself is because basically what happened is that when Pearl Harbor suffered from this surprise attack, the government vowed that would never happen again. So they planned on creating new important secret sites, etc., much further inside the country, where we would have a very good, solid chance to realize that something's coming. That's one of the terrible reasons as to why Pearl Harbor happened was because of, the Japanese were flying really low and weren't being picked up on the radar. So the plan was we can never let that happen again, so let's build all our future highly strategic bases much further into the country. And so that's why Area 51 was built where it was, deep in the heart of Nevada. And over the years, a number of other military bases were all also built in that area, 5 or 6 of them, and to a degree at least, they were sort of consolidated by the early 1950s, and to the point where Area 51 itself and Groom Lake, which Groom Lake is this huge dry lake which has been used for years and decades as a runway for the testing of new and secret and radical strange aircraft. So that's basically the history of Area 51. It goes back to the Pearl Harbor attack and finding a strategic place that couldn't be seen or approached and so on. And that brought us to the 50s, you know, when Area 51 started to be built and expanded upon.
Well, what goes on at this particular secret base?
Well, that's a good question. That's the one that everybody wants the answer to. Now, what we do know with absolute certainty is that from the early 1950s onward and right through to pretty much the present day, a lot of very strange, unusual-looking aircraft as well have been secretly tested out at Area 51. Now, some of the more well-known ones are like, for example, the U-2 spy plane and the Blackbird, the SR-71 Blackbird, and various others. And also, some of the early drones were also, long before, you know, drones were well-known by everybody else. Area 51 was testing some really unusual-looking drones in and around the area of Area 51. So, you know, this all went on as far back as the late 1940s through the 1950s was the main era, and then through the 60s and 70s and onward. And there have been rumours that Area 51 was testing some of these so-called black triangular UFOs out at Area 51. Now, we know for sure, 100% sure, that a lot of this research into test flights of weird-looking aircraft did go ahead. There's no doubt about that. So that's the one side of it all. Now, the other side of it is, are there UFOs at Area 51? Those really are the two sides of the coin. You've got the secret aircraft that we're test flying, and then you've got these rumours that somebody at Area 51 is working with alien technology. And, of course, the big question is that true? And if it is, you know, how can we find the answers?
Well, why was this base chosen to test secret aircraft in the 1950s?
Well, the main reason was because the base, if you look at some of the very few satellite pictures that we have of Area 51, the fact is that if you go out as far as you can, one of the things that'll really stand out for you is the sort of the sight of these gigantic hills and mountains, which it is quite literally almost impossible to climb and get across and around the other side, purely and simply because, as I said, you've got all these sensor equipment, night vision equipment, helicopters are literally flying around the whole area 24/7, you know, through the day and through the night. And so you put all those aspects together, and the fact that it's surrounded by these gigantic hills, which are very perilous to try and walk around and climb, it's the perfect place where literally hardly anyone could actually see what was going on, you know, and nobody still can see much to this day, because you imagine just, you know, this base, much of which is underground as well, you know, you're just not going to get a chance to see anything at all before, you know, the guards turn up and, you know, you get 7 days in jail and a hefty fine and sent on your way. So that's the reason why it was all tested out of there, because nobody could get in and nobody could get out unless you'd got the right clearance.
Damn good reason. Yeah. Yeah. Well, how does Bob Lazar fit into this particular story?
Right. Well, until sort of 1985, 1986, the only people who really were aware of the base to any significant degree were the people who lived in the little villages and towns in Nevada that, might be sort of 30, 40 miles from the base. And they knew, all of those people who lived there, they knew something was going on out there, but they just sort of kept it to themselves. It was just a known thing that the military was doing something out there. But it wasn't really until 1985-86 when the Air Force basically requested what we call a land grab in the area. And what they wanted was to essentially have massive, we're talking about gigantic swathes of land. They wanted it handed over to the Air Force to allow Area 51 to be expanded even more. And there was sort of a huge debate, sort of Senate and Congress, for national security reasons, we want to be able to expand this particular facility we have. And they never referred to it at the time as Area 51. It was just referred to as like a military facility out in Nevada. And so Area 51, even the name, wasn't really known to most people at all in the 1980s. But that all changed in the late 1980s, specifically 1988 and 1989, when this guy Bob Lazar surfaced and told this fascinating story to the media, and specifically George Knapp, who's a well-respected journalist, regular journalist in Las Vegas. And he was able to sort of hook up with Bob Lazar and hear his story. And as a journalist, an investigative journalist, George Knapp realized that this was a major story. And so he interviewed Bob Lazar under an alias, and a number of interviews were sort of broadcast on the news. And this story came tumbling out that, according to Lazar, he'd spent a brief time at Area 51, and it really was a brief time. People think he was out there for like years or even months. Collectively, it was just like barely weeks, because he said he got thrown out. But the story that he told was that he was offered a job out at Area 51, and because he was a physicist, and the team basically said, look, you can be working on something really interesting that we think you'll find interesting. And according to Lazar, when he got out there, he realized that what the team was working on was not sort of advanced aircraft, but recovered UFOs, not crashed UFOs like in a Roswell scenario. He said apart from one which had like a deep dent in it, all the rest looked just in pristine condition. And he said, he wondered at first if they were something we were building, but he said when he was able to have access to the inside, he saw that the seats were really small, for a pilot would be like 3 foot tall, and then kind of, he realized this was something totally different, and so he told his story, and then it sort of spread like wildfire throughout the UFO community, the regular media, particularly in Nevada and wherever else, and of course it also, regardless of the UFO angle, but it also sort of shone the light on Area 51, the installation as well, and people started to say, what's Area 51? And this was sort of 1989. And that really was, 88, 89, was not only the time when Lazar told his story, but that's when most people started to learn that term, Area 51.
Whoa, boy, thank you. I remember that time very well because it was all of a sudden so many people were glued to the radio. Trying to figure out what the hell was going on there. He was an extraordinary person, Bob Lazar.
He still is.
And I'm glad that he's still alive, because that's amazing to me that he is. Well,
I've heard that before, but I think, if we're to believe Lazar's story, if something were to happen to him, I think that would legitimize his story even more. I think, from the government story, the best thing is to say nothing.
Yes.
For the most part, they
Yes,
have said nothing.
That's right.
So I think, that scenario of just sort of playing it quiet is probably the best approach from their perspective they could come up with. And, over the years, numerous researchers have interviewed Lazar, and what he actually said, people said, he worked at Area 51. Technically, what he said is that, but he actually said that he was taken out to Area 51, but he was then taken to like a sort of a sub-unit of Area 51, which he called S4. And he said that S4 was like a subversion of Area 51. And he said not only that, but it actually sort of built into the mountains. So if the Russians tried, having spy satellites going over Nevada, which they actually did at the time, and they still do now, the idea was that nobody would be able to see what was going on because it was all embedded inside the mountain. Mm-hmm. So that's what Lazar actually said. It was a place within Area 51 called S4, and it was buried deep in the mountains. And as I said, he saw these 8 or 9 almost pristine flying saucer type craft. He said when he got the job to try and work on and understand the propulsion systems, he said he was given a large batch of sort of briefing documents allegedly talking about the history of UFOs and what the U.S. government knew about the subject and things like this. And so basically sort of prepping him for what he was going to see or hear and work on.
We're about ready to take a prepping here.
All right.
And we will return with Bob Lazar. And also, we're going to get inside the Area 51 to see if there are any crashed UFOs and dead aliens stored there, right? Right. Okay. We'll be back with Nick Redfern. The book is, well, right now we're talking about the Area 51 book, The Revealing Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft, Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies, Visible Ink Press. Are we going to be giving that away soon, Dr. Kortner? Yes, we are. Thank you. How would you like to win a free copy of the book we are talking about? Area 51, The Revealing Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft, Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies by Nick Redfern and published by Visible Ink Press. If you know the answer to this hour's trivia question, you will win that book. Do you know who my first guest was the last time I hosted 21st Century Radio? If you do, you're going to be the winner, but you need to qualify, and here's how to do that. If you know the answer to this hour's quiz question on 21st Century Radio and you have not won from us in the last 60 days, call in now. 410-922-6680. That's 410-WCBM-680. First with the right answer wins. Prizes are available for you to pick up at the WCBM studios in Pikesville after Friday of this week. Winners have 60 days to pick up the prizes and must wait 60 days before winning another prize from 21st Century Radio. Good luck.
Hello, this is nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, the original investigator of the Roswell incident. You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronymus.
Good old Uncle Stan. He's now gone to his greatest rewards. Fine guy. We had such a good time for 40 years. Woo. Okay, but our guest right now is Nick Redfern. Again, the book is The Revealing Truth About UFOs, that is Area 51, Revealing Truth of the UFOs, Secret Aircraft Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies, Visible Ink Press. We need 7 hours to do this right. Are there crashed UFOs and dead aliens stored at Area 51?
Well, that's a good question, Bob. We've got Lazar's story, where he talks about seeing 8 or 9 recovered UFOs or donated UFOs, however you want to term it, because this wasn't like, a scenario where somebody had recovered and taken to Area 51, sort of a wrecked, destroyed craft and, mangled bodies or anything like that. The craft was supposedly, apart from one, and that was barely marked apart from with a dent. He said all the rest were just in perfect condition. Now, Lazar did tell one particular story. He said that while he was out there, he went down one particular corridor, which 2 of the technicians there told him to go down there, and they told him that as he went past one particular door, they told him not to look into the glass part of the door. And so as he walked past, well, obviously, he couldn't fail to have a quick glance. And he claimed to have seen sort of 2 technicians looking down and talking to this small creature. Now, people have said, well, that's proof that there's aliens at Area 51. But you have to look at it from the other perspective. The guys basically said to him, we need you to go down that corridor. Oh, by the way, don't look through the glass, whatever you do. It's almost sort of forcing him to do it, like a mind game. And by his own admission, Lazar did say that there were some really weird mind games played out there. And he said on a number of occasions he would go out at like 3 or 4 times, like maybe 3 days, 4 days, do research and work on this propulsion system. Then he'd be flown back. And he would say that when he got back, he could barely remember what he'd actually done when he'd been out there, as if he'd been sort of subjected to some sort of mind control or hypnosis or, sort of chemical technology that wiped out portions of his memory of the last few days. But he said, by his own admission, Lazar said they played all sorts of weird mind games with him. And that angle of, seeing this strange creature, and these 2 technicians looking down and talking at it. Even Lazar wondered if this was a setup to make him think there were aliens there. So, so it's a fascinating story, but it's also a frustrating story because we don't have a straight answer. There's a lot of manipulation and strange things going on, and as I said, with Lazar himself having his mind played with and his memory tampered, and so we're still, unfortunately, despite the fact that the story's still being investigated and so on, we don't really know too much more than we did back in 1989, 30 years ago, when he first surfaced with his story.
Yes. You pointed that out quite a few times within your book. And so one of the reasons why I like your work so much, I loved your documentation. Good Lord. Friends, you should go to the very back of Area 51 and take a look at where you got your information from. That is terrific. For further reading, it's just excellent. Wow. That kind of thing is very important to all of us who do research, because we need to know other sources and find as many sources as we can. Pardon me?
Yeah, you're right. And that's one of the things I like about Visible Ink Press, who did this book, because one of their key issues, they always do, they have like a huge bibliography and a huge index as well, so you can, if there's something you're not sure about, or where did this story come, where did that story come from. The bibliography, for example, of this one, I think is 8 pages.
Yes.
As for the index, I think that's about 14 pages, something like that. And and I think that's an important, the more controversial a story is, the more vital it is to have further data, further sources, places, and sites and books and articles to use as resources, because there's nothing worse reading a really interesting story and and in the index or the bibliography it says source Mr. Anonymous. That doesn't help anybody,
No,
really.
it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Well, I think this is such important work, and the important thing, the way I look at this anyway, if you don't mind, is that this is both of these books are something that what we like to do on 21st Century Radio is we send out libraries. We create libraries. That sometimes they have 100 books, sometimes it's only 20 or so books. But especially going to prisons, because what joy these people have having a lot of time on their hands, and when they have learned to look at the sources of things over a period of time, because we've been doing this for a long time, and it elevates their consciousness, and you having done that. And the generosity of your publisher is going to make it possible for a number of people that are incarcerated to read this book. And this UFOs are the biggest thing in prisons to talk about. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Did not know that.
Yeah, well, really, it's because to them, it's the possibility that there's other lives and other things going on in the world, because they've had such a miserable life. Let's face it, when you're behind bars, and sometimes you're behind bars and you really didn't do anything, maybe smoked a joint or something like that, then they put you in there for 10 years for that. Having books and libraries makes a very big difference. Time passes so much more quickly when you have good books. So I want to thank you and your publisher for being generous so that we can do that kind of thing. Now,
well, I actually didn't know. I mean, that they gave copies out. That shows the generosity of the publisher. Yeah.
Well, yes, and they know that. Man, gosh, the quality of these publications is superb, especially the stuff that's in it, and it's not necessarily the you can't say that about a lot of books that deal with these particular areas. Let me just put it that way.
Well, I always think that if you're going to deal with a controversial subject, you better have enough ammunition and data to back up that controversy.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's one of the things that has always sort of frustrated me about much of ufology. We get a fascinating story. Where did it come from? Well, it came from my uncle's, friend who worked in the military. His name was Bob. And, and there's nothing, on the one hand, the story could be 100% true. On the other hand, it doesn't help us to reach Bob. It's just somebody tells somebody a story and somebody else passes it on. So I think, that's why I think the most important way of investigating this whole phenomenon is to take like a regular investigative journalistic approach, in the same way that the local journalist in the local town investigates a recent murder or something like that. They put all the pieces of the story together, and then it goes on the front page of the newspaper. And I think that's what we need to do, instead of just spreading sensational stories that cannot be validated. I think we should just keep going after the hard data and see where that really sort of takes us.
Thank you. I'd even vote you in for president just for that. Well, that's important. That really is. The quality of the research makes all the difference in the world. Now, what do you know about the secret underground facilities beneath Area 51?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting aspect because, I mentioned earlier about the Russians, for example, having spy satellites that fly over or orbit over Area 51, which is true, they do. And there was a period when they were testing like secret aircraft out at Area 51, they actually knew when the Russians were coming over, and they just wheel them back into the hangars and wait till the Russian satellites had gone by, and then bring out the aircraft again for the flight. That's a true story. But in saying all that, when we're kind of looking at the underground part of it, that's one of the reasons why the Russians weren't be able to see too much at all, because most of the work was done underground. Now, I also mentioned earlier this part of Area 51 called Groom Lake. Now, Groom Lake was once a huge lake, and now it's just a dry lake. But because it's dry now, it's the perfect place, because it's so long, to use it as a runway. So that's what Groom Lake's basically is. It's this gigantic runway. And again, if you look at the photographs and the overhead satellite pictures, you'll see not a great deal at all at Area 51. There's a bunch of hangars and other buildings, and it's quite clear for all the work that we know went on at Area 51, there's no way it could all be achieved with just the sort of half a dozen to a dozen small buildings. And so that is almost certainly due to the fact that most of the work is underground. And I've actually interviewed a number of people who used to work there, and one of them told me an interesting story that actually sort of focuses on this very issue. He said he worked there or got a job out there in the early 1970s, and when he was taken out there, his eyes would always be covered over, so he couldn't see. When he got off the plane, he would be sort of like shuffled along by some of the other guys into different buildings, and then he would be able to take off like the iPads or whatever. And he said he was then taken to an elevator, and the elevator went down to the point where he said the thing that he remembered most of all was that his ears would pop. So there was clearly a degree of going down, to different levels and so on. And he said that, the amount of time it took to sort of for the elevator to go down, with his ears popping, he kind of calculated that, he was going down not just sort of 20, 30, 40 feet. He was going possibly hundreds of feet down, which, if that's true, that would be incredible. And other people have come forward, saying things like that they worked out there, and they would go into the buildings that could be seen from the surface if you're in the right place at the right time, but that they also had the ability to go down to, incredible low levels. And of course, if you've got unique technology at a place like Area 51, in the event of a war or something like that, or a natural disaster, you'd want to preserve and keep all this technology, away from just about everybody. And what's the best way to do that? The best way to do it is to have everything stored underground. And there are also, granted they're controversial stories, but there are some stories of like tramways and trainways almost, going from places way under Area 51 to places like the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, almost like an underground version of like the New York subway or the London Underground, that kind of thing. With almost like a maze of ways to sort of get around underground that the rest of us don't see. And the number of people who've come forward talking about underground facilities at Area 51 is sort of 15 to 20 now. So when you've got that many people talking about this, I think a good case can be made that what goes on at Area 51 we only get to see, and the vast majority of the work is done at underground levels.
Well, we have an underground level to feature right now. We're going to be disappearing here for a couple of minutes. This is going to be our final break on 21st Century Radio, and we'll return with our guest, Nick Redfern. The Alien book we've done this hour is A Guide to Extraterrestrial Beings on Earth, Visible Ink Press. And the second book is Area 51, The Revealing Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft, Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies, Visible Ink Press 2019. And, of course, you can reach Nick Redfern at nickredfern40blogspot.com.
Hello, my name is Eric van Deniken. I'm the author of Chariots of the Gods and many other books. And you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronymus.
Eric Van Daniken, boy, it's been a while since we got together with him. I guess we should get together again on 21st Century Radio. But I'm glad to hear from him. And as a matter of fact, Nick, you know Eric Van Daniken, don't you?
Yes, I do. I met him a few times, yeah.
And I'm really amazed at him. Remember when he first made this was back in the late 60s, something like that. He made statements, and he was attacked over and over and over again, and he ends up being right, which is kind of amazing.
Well, I mean, what's intriguing is that, I can't say I remember the 1960s. I was barely in them. But I think, what's particularly intriguing is that, when he put out Chariots of the Gods and some of those other books, the people who believed in it, other people who didn't, and so on. But now today, with shows like Ancient Aliens, I mean, the whole ancient astronaut thing today is probably one of the most popular aspects of ufology to this day.
Certainly.
And that's that's kind of ironic, I guess, really.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy for him because he really did take a beating there 30 or 40 years ago. And I felt really poorly about that because I didn't think most of the people were reading his stuff enough to understand that what he was talking about at times. Well, what did you think about the Storm Area 51 controversy that occurred several months ago? I know very little about this.
Well, basically what it was there was a guy on the internet who said, essentially, we want to know what's going on at Area 51. Why don't we all storm the base? Which is probably not a good thing to do or a wise thing to do. But the fact is that in no time at all, the number of people who said, they would join in and take part in this was quite literally gigantic. I mean, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of people said they were going to do it, we'll all try and, we'll storm the base and we'll finally, we'll get over the perimeters, etc., and we'll finally find out what's at Area 51. And the guy who actually created this plan, he said he just did it for kind of like a bit of fun, which may have been the case, but he was actually visited by the FBI and they wanted to know why he was doing this and so on. And they realized he was just, like a young kid who was interested in Area 51 and UFOs. And so, they didn't sort of, bring charges or nothing like that. But, as he got closer to the day, people were saying, yeah, we're all going to do this, we're going to charge the base and so on. What actually happened at the very end of it all, it was just a few months back, it all kind of fell apart, and what you just really had were people just sitting around as far as close as you can get to Area 51, and just sort of take deck chairs with them and a few beers and whatever, and just sit outside and talk about Area 51 rather than storm it. And, it all kind of fell apart. People ask me, what do I think about this? And, for me, I get it. People want to know what's at Area 51.
Sure do.
But in this day and world, you have to remember, Area 51, regardless of what you or me think is going on there or what's stored there, etc., the fact is that Area 51 is a U.S. government military installation, and my view is that no one at all should be encouraging people to storm and invade U.S. government military installations. That's just crazy, and you can easily understand why people, the military might have to, unfortunately, take the ultimate state to prevent this from happening, because, I mean, who's to say that some of these people might not be sort of Russian spies or North Korean spies, not really ufologists? So my view is that, anybody who tries or even contemplates, trying to break into any military U.S. installation, of which Area 51 is one of them, if you do that, well, you've only got yourself to blame if you end up sort of 5 years in jail for, penetrating the perimeters and getting towards the base and possibly into the base. If you do that, I mean, if you think about it, if somebody tried to do that at any other military installation in the United States, like your nearest Air Force base, everybody would say, well, that's just stupid, you deserve everything you get, which they would,
yeah, sure.
But it seems to be, for some people, Area 51, that's where the aliens are, and that somehow legitimizes, what they want to do. Well, no, nobody should be doing that. And my view is that if you're going to break into or try and storm into a military installation like Area 51 or Area 51 itself, you get everything you deserve. So.
Yeah. Well, what a strange situation altogether. I can see.
But yeah, I mean, but it was a weird situation to start with, at least. You had thousands of people saying, yeah, they're all going to turn up in trailers and, and sort of penetrate the fence, and we're going to find the aliens. I mean, It was just crazy.
It sounds like they've seen a lot of movies and that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey,
but the unfortunate thing for those people is that it would have been jail time, significant jail time, and they'd have deserved it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was going to say something about something I did at the White House one time and shouldn't have done, but I better not say it. The thing is, what has been strange in my life is that, having been invited to the White House a number of times, it's been mostly the Republicans. And I'm not a Republican, I'm a Democrat. And I never understood that. But all of them read my research, and they decided, especially President Ford, read it, and they decided that I was important enough to invite to have dinner with them. But the strange thing was, he didn't show up. But he wasn't supposed to show up. I had a beard and I had long hair, and I was told immediately by the guards. I had the guards. At first, they didn't believe that I was invited. I showed them my passes. And then they said, "Okay, you can come in," but they had to pull out their guns at the same time, and it was quite a strange time period. Now,
I'll bet.
Yes, it was. What other whistleblowers apart from Lazar may have come forward? Because I don't recall too many.
Well, there's probably somewhere in the region of about 9 or 10 who claim to have, worked at Area 51. And, well, I mean, a lot of people have, come forward and talked about their legitimate known work, provable work, like on spy planes, that kind of thing. I mean, some people have written, books about just that angle, so. But in terms of the UFO angle, it may be sort of like 10, 15 people, and most of them, are sort of spoken about all this under an alias or a pseudonym, So, unfortunately, like I said earlier, we're not really too much further advanced. I mean, just late last year, Lazar actually published his autobiography, which actually expands quite significantly on the original story and gets into some more of the intricacies of how he got the job and all this. So, we've got the book. There was a movie. Not a fictional movie, like a documentary movie about his experiences, and that sort of renewed things in the last year or so. So, we're certainly not at the end with it, but it is the case that it's still 30 years after Lazar first surfaced. he still is the number one guy in terms of talking about what he claims to have seen out there.
Yeah, well, he's extraordinary. There's no two ways about it. He sure shook things up
Yep.
in a way that I never thought I'd see. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. What's your next book?
Well, the next book I've got comes out in early April, and it's called Assassinations, and it's all about the history of assassinations going back from ancient Egypt right through to things like Abraham Lincoln, Jack the Ripper, who killed JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, and right up to mysterious deaths in the 21st century.
Are you going to do Sadat? Anwar
Sorry?
Sadat?
No, he's actually not in there. I was I got to that point where the publisher said, well, enough's enough. There was only enough sort of space and pictures, to allow for the book to actually exist, really.
Well, Anwar Sadat, my wife and I had spent some time there in Egypt with him. And he helped us when we were setting up sister city relationships with Egypt and Maryland and Baltimore and that kind of thing. He was a great man. And you know what? The first thing we talked about was the pyramid and the eye in the triangle. And he lectured. He lectured me on the pyramid and the eye in the triangle, telling me what it was. And then I told him, hey, I just sent you my doctoral thesis. So, yes, I did.
You should do your own book, Bob.
Yes, I did. I did, yeah. But he didn't know that, even though I sent it to him. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again another time.